The whispers of Lowell's Creek traveled faster than a prairie fire in July, murmuring that Wade Calloway had lost his mind. The solitary cowboy with the haunted eyes and steady hands had ridden into town yesterday and done the unthinkable. He'd married Virginia Harper, the mail-order bride who'd been rejected by 3 different men and left stranded in town for nearly 2 months. The year was 1878, and in the harsh reality of the Montana Territory, a woman alone faced limited options. Virginia Harper had become something of a curiosity in Lowell's Creek, a woman whose future hung precariously in the balance of charity and suspicion. "You sure you know what you're doing, Wade?" Sheriff Martin Palmer asked as he witnessed the hasty ceremony at the small whitewashed church on the edge of town. "You ain't even spoke more than 10 words to the woman." Wade had merely nodded, his weathered face betraying nothing as he slipped a simple gold band onto Virginia's finger. "I know enough," was all he said. Virginia Harper, now Virginia Calloway, stood beside her new husband in a faded blue dress that had seen better days, her honey brown hair pinned beneath a modest hat, her pale face a mixture of relief and resignation. At 24, she was no young, starry-eyed girl but a woman who understood the practicalities of survival. The couple departed immediately after the ceremony, Wade helping his new bride onto his sturdy buckskin gelding before mounting behind her. They rode out of town with curious eyes following them, heading toward Wade's small ranch nestled in the foothills some 15 miles outside of Lowell's Creek. The journey passed in silence, the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them and the vast Montana landscape surrounding them. Virginia sat stiffly, her back barely touching Wade's chest despite the proximity their shared saddle demanded. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Wade's property came into view. It wasn't much, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral, a vegetable garden fenced against rabbits, and beyond, several acres of grazing land bordered by pine forest. "It ain't much," Wade said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for hours. "But it's paid for. No debts." Virginia nodded. "It looks sturdy," she offered, her voice soft with the remnants of an Eastern accent. Wade helped her down from the horse, his touch impersonal and brief. Up close, Virginia could see the lines etched into his face, the way his dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples despite him being only in his early 30s. His eyes were what struck her most, a deep blue that seemed to carry shadows she couldn't name. "I'll show you around," he said, leading the horse toward the barn. "There's stew from this morning. Should still be good to heat up." Virginia followed, taking in her new home with careful observation. The cabin was simple but clean, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs, and a small sitting area with a rocking chair. A narrow doorway led to a bedroom, and a lean-to addition served as a kitchen space. Wade returned from settling the horse and stood awkwardly in the doorway. "I'll sleep in the barn," he announced. "The bedroom's yours." Virginia turned to him, surprise evident on her face. "But we're married." "On paper," Wade agreed. "You needed a husband." "I needed." He trailed off, seeming uncertain how to finish the thought. "We can discuss arrangements tomorrow. You must be tired." Before Virginia could respond, Wade had retreated, leaving her alone in a stranger's cabin, a gold band on her finger, and questions swirling in her mind. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster, and the soft glow of dawn filtering through the cabin's single window. Virginia woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day rushed back to her. She was married. To a man she barely knew. A man who had slept in his barn rather than claim his marital rights. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 remaining dresses, a serviceable brown cotton, and pinned her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. The cabin was empty when she emerged from the bedroom, but the fire had been stoked and a pot of coffee sat warming on the stove. Outside, she found Wade chopping wood, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms browned by the sun. He paused when he saw her, lowering the axe. "Morning," he said, wiping sweat from his brow with his shirt sleeve. "Coffee's hot if you want some." "Thank you," Virginia replied. I can make breakfast. If you'd like. Wade nodded. Appreciate that. Eggs in the root cellar. Bacon too. They worked in parallel silence, Wade continuing with the wood, Virginia navigating the unfamiliar kitchen. By the time she called him in, she had managed a respectable meal of fried eggs, bacon, and biscuits she'd found wrapped in a cloth. They ate without speaking until Virginia finally gathered her courage. Mr. Calloway, Wade, he corrected. Reckon you should use my given name, being married and all. Wade, she amended. I think we should discuss expectations. I'm grateful for what you've done, truly. But I don't understand why you've done it. Wade set down his fork, studying her face with those intense blue eyes. Folks in town were talking about what might happen to you. Wasn't right. So you married me out of pity? The words came out sharper than Virginia intended. No, Wade said simply. Not pity. Then what? Wade took a sip of his coffee, seeming to weigh his words carefully. I've been alone a long while. Ranch needs a woman's touch. You needed a place. Seemed sensible. Virginia's eyes narrowed slightly. There was more to it than that, she was certain. But Wade's expression remained unreadable. I want to earn my keep, she said finally. I can cook, clean, so I'm not afraid of hard work. A hint of approval flickered across Wade's face. Never thought you were. He stood, carrying his plate to the washbasin. I've got to check the south pasture fence. Won't be back till sundown. And just like that, Virginia was left alone again, with more questions than answers about the quiet cowboy who was now her husband. The days fell into a rhythm as April gave way to May. Virginia took to ranch life with determined practicality, establishing herself in the household routine. She expanded the vegetable garden, repaired curtains, scrubbed floors that hadn't seen a proper cleaning in years, and filled the cabin with small touches that transformed it from a mere shelter to something resembling a home. Wade remained something of a mystery. He worked from dawn till dusk, tackling the endless tasks of a small rancher with silent efficiency. He was unfailingly polite, thanking her for meals and occasionally commenting on improvements she'd made to the cabin, but he maintained a careful distance. Each night, he retreated to the small room he'd fashioned for himself in the barn loft, leaving Virginia alone in the cabin. They were married in name only, a fact that both relieved and increasingly puzzled her. It was during the third week that their fragile routine was disrupted by an unexpected thunderstorm. The sky had darkened ominously throughout the afternoon, and by dusk, rain pounded the roof with violent intensity, punctuated by crashes of thunder that made the cabin's windows rattle. Virginia had just finished washing the dinner dishes when the door burst open, admitting a drenched Wade carrying an equally soaked bundle of fur. Found her huddled under a bush by the creek, he explained, nodding to the trembling puppy in his arms. Creek's rising fast. Wouldn't have made it through the night. Virginia quickly grabbed a towel, helping Wade dry the small black and white dog. Poor thing, she murmured, wrapping the puppy in the towel and cradling it against her chest. She's half-starved. Wade watched as Virginia fussed over the animal, warming some milk and soaking a bit of bread in it for the hungry pup. Something softened in his expression, the first real emotion beyond courtesy that Virginia had seen from him. You've got a gentle way about you, he observed quietly. Virginia looked up, surprised by both the comment and the warm look in his eyes. I've always loved animals, she said. My father wouldn't allow pets, but I used to feed the strays behind our house when I could. Your father, Wade said, removing his wet coat and hanging it by the fire. You don't speak of your family. Nor do you, Virginia countered gently. A faint smile tugged at Wade's lips. Fair enough. He sat in the chair opposite her, watching as the puppy eagerly lapped at the milk-soaked bread. Storm's bad. Barn roof's leaking right over my bed. Virginia met his eyes. The cabin has plenty of room. I'll take the floor by the fire, Wade said, already moving to collect extra blankets from the chest against the wall. Later, With the puppy sleeping in a makeshift bed of towels near the hearth and Wade stretched out on a pallet nearby, Virginia lay awake listening to the storm and the sound of her husband's breathing. It was strange not being alone in the cabin at night, but not unpleasant. "Wade?" she ventured softly, unsure if he was still awake. Came the drowsy response. "Thank you. For the puppy. And for everything else." There was a pause before he replied. "Get some sleep, Virginia." The storm cleared by morning, but it had left its mark. The creek had swollen beyond its banks, flooding the lower pasture and washing away a section of fence. Virginia spent the day close to the cabin, caring for the puppy she named Daisy while Wade assessed the damage and began repairs. He returned at midday, mud-splattered and weary. "Fence is worse than I thought," he reported, accepting the cup of coffee Virginia offered. "Might need to ride into town for supplies." "I could go with you," Virginia suggested. "We need flour and sugar anyway." Wade seemed to consider this, then nodded. "We'll go tomorrow if the creek's down enough to cross." The prospect of returning to town filled Virginia with mixed emotions. She hadn't been back to Lowell's Creek since her wedding day, and she wasn't eager to face the curious stares and whispered comments that would surely greet them. Her apprehension must have shown on her face, because Wade added, "You don't have to come if you'd rather not." "No," Virginia said firmly. "I'm your wife. It's time people saw us together properly." Something like approval flickered in Wade's eyes. "All right then. We leave at first light." The journey to town the next morning was taken in companionable silence, though Virginia noticed Wade was more attentive than usual, pointing out a hawk circling overhead, or a patch of wildflowers blooming along the trail. It was as if the storm had shifted something between them, cracking open a door that had previously been firmly closed. Lowell's Creek was bustling with activity when they arrived, the main street crowded with wagons and townspeople going about their business. Virginia was acutely aware of the curious glances cast their way as Wade helped her down from the horse in front of the general store. "Mrs. Calloway," he said formally, offering his arm in a gesture that surprised her. "Shall we?" Virginia placed her hand on his arm, feeling oddly comforted by his solid presence beside her. "Yes, Mr. Calloway, we shall." Inside the store, they were greeted by Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, whose eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of them together. "Wade, Mrs. Calloway." He nodded. "What can I help you with today?" Wade handed over his list of needed supplies while Virginia selected household items. She was examining a bolt of fabric when she became aware of whispers behind her. "Don't know what he was thinking, marrying her after everyone else turned her down. Must be desperate for a woman, any woman. Probably won't last the summer." Virginia's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she kept her head high, continuing to inspect the fabric as if she hadn't heard a word. Suddenly, Wade was beside her, his hand coming to rest lightly on the small of her back. "Found everything you need?" he asked, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the gossiping women behind them. "Almost," Virginia replied, grateful for his timely appearance. Wade's eyes traveled to the blue calico she'd been admiring. "That would suit you," he commented. "Get enough for a dress. And whatever else you want." The whispering stopped abruptly, and Virginia felt a small surge of triumph as Wade's hand remained protectively at her back while they completed their purchases. Outside, as they were loading their supplies, Sheriff Palmer approached them. "Wade, Virginia," he greeted them. "Good to see you both in town. How's married life treating you?" "Just fine, Sheriff," Wade answered before Virginia could speak. The sheriff's eyes moved between them curiously. "Glad to hear it. Some folks were taking bets on how long it would last, but I told them Wade Calloway isn't a man who makes decisions lightly." "No, he isn't," Virginia agreed, surprising herself by adding, "and neither am I." Wade gave her a quick, approving glance before turning back to the sheriff. "Any news worth knowing, Martin?" The men fell into conversation about cattle prices and reports of rustling near the territorial border, giving Virginia a moment to observe her husband. In town, Among others, he seemed different, more guarded, his shoulders tense beneath his worn jacket. Yet there was also a quiet authority about him that commanded respect, evidenced by the way the sheriff deferred to his opinions. It was approaching noon when they finished their business and prepared to leave. Wade suggested they have a meal at the small restaurant before heading back, a proposition that Virginia eagerly accepted, having missed the luxury of food prepared by someone else. The restaurant was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and curtains at the windows. They were seated at a corner table, and Virginia couldn't help noticing how Wade positioned himself with his back to the wall, his eyes regularly scanning the room. "Old habit," he explained when he caught her watching him. "From my army days." This was new information. "You were in the army?" Wade nodded, unfolding his napkin. "Cavalry. After the war. Frontier duty mostly." "How long?" "5 years. Got out in '73. Virginia did the calculation in her head. That would have made him about 28 when he left the army, meaning he was around 33 now, 8 or 9 years her senior. "Is that when you came to Montana?" she asked, genuinely curious about this glimpse into his past. Wade confirmed, glancing up as the waitress approached with coffee. "Seemed as good a place as any to start fresh." Virginia sensed there was more to the story, but their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their food. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Wade surprised her with a question of his own. "Why'd you decide to become a mail-order bride, Virginia? You're educated, well-spoken. Must have had other options back east." The directness of the question caught her off guard. Wade wasn't one for personal inquiries, and this was perhaps the most interest he'd shown in her background since they'd met. Virginia set down her fork, considering how to answer. "My father died last year. Left nothing but debts. The house, everything had to be sold." She took a sip of water before continuing. "I was working as a seamstress, but the pay was barely enough to eat. And there was a man, my father's former business partner, who felt I owed him something. He became insistent." Wade's expression darkened. "He hurt you?" "He tried," Virginia said quietly. "I managed to avoid the worst of his intentions, but I knew I couldn't stay. The advertisement for brides seemed like a chance at a new beginning." "And then you got here and found yourself rejected 3 times over," Wade said, his voice tinged with something that might have been anger on her behalf. Virginia lifted her chin slightly. "Yes. The first man had expected someone younger. The second wanted someone more accommodating. And the third," she hesitated. "Morris Baker," Wade supplied, his mouth a grim line. "What was his excuse?" "He said I wasn't pretty enough to compensate for being so opinionated," Virginia admitted, feeling the sting of the words even in remembrance. Wade's eyes moved over her face deliberately, lingering on features she had always considered unremarkable: her straight nose, wide-set hazel eyes, full mouth. "Baker's a fool," he said finally, returning to his meal. The simple statement, delivered without flourish, warmed Virginia more than any elaborate compliment could have. They finished their meal with lighter conversation, and by the time they started for home, Virginia found herself viewing her enigmatic husband with new interest and appreciation. June brought warmer weather and longer days. The small ranch flourished under their combined efforts, with Virginia proving herself not just capable in the house but willing to help with outdoor tasks as well. She learned to milk the cow Wade had purchased on their second trip to town, helped with the endless weeding of the garden, and even assisted with mending fences. Daisy the puppy grew rapidly, following Virginia everywhere and quickly becoming a beloved companion. Wade had initially maintained that the dog was Virginia's responsibility, but she often caught him sneaking treats to the pup or scratching her ears when he thought no one was looking. More significantly, the distance between the newly married couple had begun to diminish. Wade still slept in the barn, but he lingered in the cabin longer each evening, sometimes reading aloud from one of the few books they owned while Virginia sewed or mended. Occasionally, he would share stories from his army days or recount tales he'd heard from old-timers about the early days of the Montana Territory. Virginia, in turn, told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, her father's failed business ventures, and her mother who had died when she was 14. She described the busy streets of Philadelphia, the theater performances she'd attended in her more prosperous youth, and her dreams of someday seeing the ocean. They were building something between them, not quite the passion of romance novels, but a deepening friendship marked by growing trust and mutual respect. It was on a warm evening in late June that Virginia finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her for weeks. They were sitting on the small porch Wade had built onto the front of the cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant hues of gold and purple. Daisy lay at their feet, occasionally twitching in her sleep. "Wade," Virginia began, her fingers nervously plucking at a loose thread on her skirt. "There's something I've been wondering." He glanced over at her, his expression relaxed in the fading light. "Why did you really marry me?" "And don't say it was because the ranch needed a woman's touch," she added quickly. "There are other women in the territory who would have been happy to marry a man with his own land and no debts." Wade was silent for so long that Virginia thought he might not answer. Finally, he shifted in his chair to face her more directly. "Do you remember anything about your journey to Montana? Before you reached Lowell's Creek?" Confused by the apparent change of subject, Virginia frowned. "Of course. The train to Denver, then the stagecoach north. It was a difficult journey." Wade nodded. "The stage was attacked, wasn't it? About 2 days south of here." Virginia stiffened, memories of that terrifying day flooding back. "Yes. Road agents. They shot the driver and one of the passengers. An elderly man traveling to see his daughter. But they didn't get the strongbox. Or hurt any of the women aboard." Wade continued, watching her intently. "No," Virginia agreed slowly. "Because..." Her eyes widened as realization dawned. "There was a rider. A man who came to our rescue. He exchanged gunfire with the robbers and drove them off." She stared at Wade, seeing him now with new eyes. "That was you?" Wade inclined his head slightly in confirmation. "I was on my way back from delivering horses to Fort Harrison. Heard the shots. You were wounded," Virginia recalled, the memory sharpening. "I saw blood on your sleeve before you rode away. Bullet grazed my arm. Nothing serious. But I never saw your face clearly. You kept your hat low, and you left as soon as the danger had passed. How did you know it was me in town?" "It was months later." Wade's lips quirked in the hint of a smile. "The hair. Like honey in the sunlight." "And you were wearing a blue dress that day on the stage. Same one you had on when I saw you in town that first time. Remembered thinking it matched your eyes." Virginia's heart quickened at the thought that he had noticed her, remembered her so specifically. "So you married me because you felt responsible for me somehow?" "No," Wade said firmly. "I married you because during that stage robbery, when bullets were flying and men were dying, you didn't cower or scream. You pulled that old man's head into your lap and comforted him while he died. Then you stood up, faced down those robbers, and told them they'd have to shoot you before you'd let them harm the children on that stage." Virginia swallowed hard, remembering her own terror even as she'd spoken those defiant words. "I was frightened out of my wits," she admitted. "But you did it anyway," Wade said, admiration clear in his voice. "That's courage. Real courage. When I saw you in town months later, being talked about like you were damaged goods because a few fools couldn't recognize what was right in front of them." He shook his head. "Couldn't let that stand." Virginia sat in stunned silence, absorbing this revelation. All this time, she had assumed their marriage was one of mere convenience, perhaps tinged with pity on Wade's part. To discover that he had seen something in her worth admiring, worth fighting for, was overwhelming. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked finally. Wade shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "Wasn't sure you'd remember. Or care. Figured actions speak louder than words anyway." "They do," Virginia agreed softly. "But words matter too." She reached out impulsively, covering his hand with her own. Thank you for telling me now. Wade turned his hand beneath hers, their palms meeting, fingers interlacing. It was the first time he had touched her with anything approaching intimacy, and Virginia felt the contact like a current flowing between them. They sat in silence as darkness fell, hands joined, each lost in private thoughts about the path that had brought them together, and the future that might lie ahead. That night, for the first time, Wade didn't retreat to the barn. Instead, he made his bed on the floor beside the fireplace, closer than before but still maintaining a respectful distance. It was a small change, but a significant one, and Virginia fell asleep with a sense of hopeful anticipation warming her heart. The 4th of July brought an invitation to a celebration in town. The citizens of Lowell's Creek were planning a picnic, games, and dancing to mark the nation's birthday, and though Wade initially seemed reluctant to attend, Virginia's obvious excitement persuaded him. "We don't have to stay long," she assured him as they prepared for the journey on the morning of the holiday. "But it would be nice to hear music again, don't you think?" Wade, watching her pin her hair in a more elaborate style than usual, merely nodded. He had given her the blue calico fabric weeks ago, and she had transformed it into a becoming dress that enhanced the color of her eyes and complemented her fair complexion. Seeing her in it now, Wade seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "You look," he began, then cleared his throat. "That dress suits you." Virginia smiled, pleased by his reaction. "Thank you. It's nice to have an occasion to wear something pretty." The town was decorated with bunting and flags when they arrived, the main street closed to traffic and tables set up in the shade of cottonwood trees. Children ran about playing tag while adults gathered in conversational groups, many turning to watch as Wade helped Virginia down from their wagon. Sheriff Palmer was the first to greet them, his wife Louisa at his side. "Wade, Virginia! Glad you could make it," he called, approaching with a friendly wave. Introductions were made, and soon Virginia found herself drawn into conversation with several of the town's women while Wade moved off to speak with the men. To her surprise, the women were far more welcoming than they had been during her previous visit to town, asking about life on the ranch and complimenting her dress. "We were all a bit surprised when Wade married you," Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, admitted candidly. "He's kept to himself since coming to these parts. Barely speaks 2 words together most times. My Thomas says he's the most reliable man in the county, though," added Louisa Palmer. "If Wade Calloway gives his word, you can count on it." Virginia smiled, warmed by these positive assessments of her husband. "He's a good man," she agreed simply. The day progressed pleasantly, with a shooting competition, which Wade declined to enter despite encouragement from the sheriff, races for the children, and a lavish potluck dinner spread across the tables. Virginia had contributed an apple pie that received numerous compliments, and she found herself genuinely enjoying the sense of community she had missed during her isolation at the ranch. As evening approached, lanterns were lit and a small band consisting of a fiddle, banjo, and accordion set up on the porch of the general store. Couples began to gather for dancing, and Virginia watched with wistful interest, not expecting Wade to participate. She was standing near one of the refreshment tables when she felt a presence beside her. Turning, she found Wade looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, the formal phrasing at odds with his usual direct manner. Virginia's surprise must have shown on her face, because he quickly added, "If you'd rather not, I'd love to." She interrupted, setting down her cup of lemonade and placing her hand in his outstretched one. Wade led her to the edge of the makeshift dance floor as the musicians began a waltz. His hand settled at her waist, firm but gentle, while the other clasped hers with careful precision. Despite his usual preference for solitude, Wade proved to be a competent dancer, guiding her smoothly through the steps. "You dance well," Virginia observed, looking up at him with newfound appreciation. A faint smile touched his lips. "Army balls. Officers were expected to attend. Never much cared for it until now." The simple implication that dancing with her was different, special somehow, sent a flutter through Virginia's chest. She was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the warmth of his palm against hers, the subtle scent of soap and leather that she had come to associate with him. They danced twice more before Wade suggested they start for home, mindful of the long ride back to the ranch. Virginia agreed, though part of her wished the evening could continue indefinitely. Something had shifted between them on the dance floor, a crossing of some invisible boundary that had kept them apart. The ride home was quiet but companionable, the wagon moving steadily through the darkness lit only by stars and a quarter moon. Virginia found herself drifting closer to Wade on the seat, until their shoulders touched, a point of warmth in the cool night air. "Thank you for today," she said softly as the outline of their cabin appeared in the distance. "I had a wonderful time." Wade glanced down at her, his expression hard to read in the dim light. "Glad of it," he replied. Then, after a brief pause, "You looked happy. Dancing. Talking with the other women." "I was happy," Virginia confirmed. "But I'm happy at home too, Wade. With you." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Wade's hands tightened momentarily on the reins before he responded, his voice low and earnest. "I want you to be happy, Virginia. Never thought I'd have a wife. Now that I do." He trailed off, seeming to struggle with expressing his feelings. "Now that you do?" Virginia prompted gently. "Now that I do, I find myself wanting to be worthy of you," he finished, the words emerging in a rush. Virginia's heart swelled with emotion. Impulsively, she leaned up and pressed a kiss to his cheek, just at the corner of his mouth. "You already are," she whispered. Wade turned his head slightly, their lips meeting in a brief, gentle kiss that ended all too quickly as the wagon rolled to a stop before their cabin. For a moment neither moved, the significance of what had just happened settling over them like a mantle. Then Wade cleared his throat and jumped down from the wagon, coming around to help Virginia descend. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. "I'll see to the horses," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Virginia nodded, reluctantly moving toward the cabin. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. "Wade? Don't sleep in the barn tonight." Their eyes met across the yard, a silent communication passing between them. Wade nodded once, a promise in the simple gesture. That night marked a true beginning for their marriage. Wade moved his few possessions from the barn into the cabin's bedroom, and though they approached physical intimacy with careful consideration for each other, the emotional barriers between them had crumbled. July gave way to August, bringing with it the intense heat of high summer and the constant work of preparing for the coming winter. Wade hired 2 local boys to help with haying, while Virginia preserved garden produce and began putting aside stores for the lean months ahead. Their evenings were precious times of connection, whether spent in quiet conversation or discovering the joy of physical affection. Wade, initially hesitant and almost reverent in his touches, gradually revealed a depth of passion that matched Virginia's own awakening desires. Their marriage, begun as an arrangement of convenience, had transformed into a genuine partnership built on growing love and mutual respect. It was during this golden period that the past Virginia had fled came crashing back into their lives. She was alone at the ranch one afternoon in late August, Wade having ridden to a neighboring property to help with the difficult calving. Virginia was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin, Daisy playing nearby, when the sound of an approaching horse made her look up. The rider who came into view was a stranger to her, a well-dressed man on an expensive-looking bay horse. Something about his bearing, the confident set of his shoulders, sent a chill of recognition through Virginia even before he drew close enough for her to see his face. "Well, well," he called as he reined in his horse. "Virginia Harper. Or should I say, Virginia Calloway now?" James Wilson. Her father's former business partner. The man whose unwanted advances had been one of the primary reasons for her flight from Pennsylvania. "Mr. Wilson," she acknowledged stiffly, unconsciously backing toward the cabin. "What are you doing in Montana?" He dismounted with fluid grace, tying his horse to the fence post. "Business, my dear. Always business." Mining interests, to be specific. His eyes traveled over her with insulting thoroughness. But finding you here is an unexpected pleasure. I've thought of you often since you disappeared so abruptly. I'm married now, Virginia said, lifting her chin defiantly. My husband will be returning soon. Wilson smiled, the expression not reaching his cold eyes. Yes, I heard about your fortunate match in town. After being rejected multiple times, I understand. How desperate this Calloway fellow must have been. The deliberate cruelty of his words stung, but Virginia refused to show it. My husband is a good man. Far better than you could ever hope to be. Wilson's smile faded, replaced by the hard look she remembered all too well from Philadelphia. Your father owed me a great deal of money when he died, Virginia. Money I never recovered. My father's debts died with him, Virginia countered. The law. I'm not interested in the law, Wilson interrupted, taking a step closer. I'm interested in what's owed to me. And I've decided that you, my dear, are suitable compensation. Virginia's heart raced with fear, but she stood her ground. Get off our property, Mr. Wilson. Now. He laughed, the sound chilling in its lack of humor. Or what? Your husband is away. We're alone. I could take what I want and be gone before he returns. Daisy, sensing Virginia's distress, began barking furiously, placing herself between Virginia and the unwelcome visitor. Wilson's face darkened with annoyance. Call off your dog, he demanded. No, Virginia said, drawing strength from the animal's protective presence. Leave now, or you'll what? Wilson sneered, reaching inside his jacket. Scream? There's no one to hear you. The glint of metal in his hand, a small pistol, froze Virginia momentarily. But as Wilson raised the weapon, not toward her but toward the barking dog, Virginia's paralysis broke. She lunged forward with a cry, knocking his arm upward just as the gun discharged, sending the bullet harmlessly into the air. Wilson snarled with rage, grabbing her wrist with bruising force. You little fool! The sound of another gunshot cracked through the air, and Wilson jerked back, clutching his shoulder as blood blossomed on his expensive jacket. Take your hands off my wife! Came Wade's voice, deadly calm and cold as winter ice. Virginia spun to see Wade at the corner of the cabin, rifle raised and aimed squarely at Wilson's chest. His face was a mask of controlled fury, blue eyes hard as flint. Wilson staggered back, pain and shock warring on his features. You shot me! He gasped incredulously. Be grateful I aimed for your shoulder, Wade replied evenly, moving forward to stand beside Virginia. Next one goes through your heart if you don't mount up and ride out in the next 10 seconds. This isn't over, Wilson hissed, backing toward his horse, his wounded arm held awkwardly against his chest. The law. Sheriff Palmer will be mighty interested to hear how you threatened a woman with a gun. Wade cut him off. 5 seconds. Wilson fumbled his way onto his horse, his face pale with pain and rage. You'll regret this, both of you. He spat before wheeling his mount and galloping away. The moment he was out of sight, Wade set down his rifle and turned to Virginia, his hands gentle as they examined her for injuries. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? Just my wrist, Virginia assured him, showing the red marks that were already beginning to bruise. Wade, how did you know? You weren't supposed to be back until evening. Finished early. Got a bad feeling halfway home, so I pushed hard. His eyes darkened as they fixed on her bruised wrist. Who was he, Virginia? She told him everything then about Wilson's financial relationship with her father, his increasingly aggressive behavior after her father's death, and her fear that he would force himself on her if she stayed in Philadelphia. Wade listened without interruption, though the muscle ticking in his jaw betrayed his anger. When she finished, he drew her into his arms, holding her as if she were something infinitely precious. He won't touch you again, Wade promised, his voice fierce with protective determination. Not while I live. Virginia believed him, taking comfort in the solid strength of his embrace. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that James Wilson was not a man who accepted defeat easily. His parting words echoed in her mind, a shadow falling across the happiness she and Wade had found together. Wade insisted they ride into town immediately to report the incident to Sheriff Palmer. The lawman listened gravely to their account, making notes in his ledger. "This Wilson fellow sounds like trouble," Palmer commented when they'd finished. "I'll send telegrams to the surrounding towns, let folks know to keep an eye out for him. But you should be careful, both of you. Men like that don't give up easily." "We'll be watchful," Wade assured him. "I'd appreciate it if you'd ride out to check on Virginia when I have to be away from the ranch." The sheriff nodded. "Of course. Louisa would skin me alive if I didn't look after Virginia anyway. She's quite taken with your wife, Wade." Virginia managed a smile despite her lingering distress. "Thank you, Sheriff." They spent the night in town at the small hotel, Wade reluctant to make the journey back to the ranch in darkness after the day's events. In their narrow hotel room, with its thin walls and lumpy mattress, Wade held Virginia close, whispering reassurances until she finally drifted into uneasy sleep. The next several days passed without incident, though Wade was noticeably vigilant, keeping his rifle closer to hand and riding the boundaries of their property each morning and evening. Virginia tried to maintain her normal routine, refusing to let fear dictate her actions, but she found herself startling at unexpected sounds and keeping Daisy near her at all times. It was nearly a week after Wilson's appearance that Sheriff Palmer rode out to the ranch with news. "Wilson's been spotted in Helena," he reported as Virginia served coffee at the kitchen table. "Apparently, he's representing some Eastern investors in negotiations with the Silversmith Mining Company." Wade frowned. "That's legitimate business. Doesn't sound like a man planning revenge." "Maybe not," Palmer agreed. "But there's more. He's been asking questions about you, Wade. About your background." Virginia glanced at her husband, noting the sudden tension in his posture. "What kind of questions?" "About his army service mostly. And whether he'd ever been in Pennsylvania." Wade's face had gone very still. "What did you tell him?" The sheriff shrugged. "Nothing much to tell. Said you'd served with distinction in the cavalry and had been in Montana since '73 as far as I knew. Don't know anything about Pennsylvania connections." Wade nodded, his expression unreadable. "Appreciate the information, Martin." After the sheriff departed, Virginia turned to Wade, concern etched on her features. "Wade? Why would Wilson be asking about Pennsylvania?" Wade was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the middle distance. Finally he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Because I was there. In Philadelphia. Before Montana." Virginia stared at him, confused. "You were in Philadelphia? When?" "Winter of '72, just before my discharge." Wade's eyes met hers, something like apprehension in their blue depths. "Virginia, there's something I need to tell you." "Something I should have told you months ago." The gravity in his voice sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. "What is it?" Wade reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own. "The stagecoach attack wasn't the first time I saw you. It was the second." Virginia frowned, trying to make sense of his words. "I don't understand." "I was in Philadelphia on leave before my final deployment. Walking through a commercial district when I heard shouting from an alley." Wade's thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands as he spoke. "There was a young woman being accosted by a man. He had her backed against the wall, was trying to force his attentions on her." Virginia's breath caught as memory stirred. "The soldier," she whispered. "You were the soldier who intervened." Wade nodded. "I pulled him off you. There was a fight. He had a knife. You were injured." Virginia recalled, the scene coming back to her with sudden clarity. "He slashed your side before running away." "Needed 12 stitches," Wade confirmed with a wry smile. "Worth it, though." Virginia's mind raced, piecing together this new information. "That was almost 7 years ago. And you remembered me all this time?" "Not your name," Wade admitted. "But your face?" "Yes. The way you thanked me, insisted on pressing your handkerchief to my wound until help arrived, even though you were shaking with fear. I remembered. And then you saw me again on the stagecoach," Virginia said slowly. "Another rescue. By then, I was starting to think our paths crossing might mean something," Wade said, a hint of sheepishness in his admission. "And when you saw me in Lowell's Creek—" "Third time," Wade nodded. "Couldn't ignore that kind of sign." Virginia's eyes filled with tears, though they were born of wonder rather than sadness. "You saved me 3 times, and I never even knew your name until the third." Wade lifted one hand to gently wipe away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "The man in Philadelphia," he said carefully. "Was it Wilson?" Virginia nodded. "Yes. It was after my father's funeral. He cornered me when I was walking home." Wade's jaw tightened. "That explains his interest in me. If he recognized me as the soldier from that day—" "He wants revenge on both of us," Virginia concluded, a chill running through her at the realization. "Let him try," Wade said grimly. "I've fought worse than James Wilson." Despite Wade's confidence, they redoubled their precautions in the days that followed. Virginia never ventured far from the cabin alone, and Wade arranged for one of the neighboring ranchers' sons to stay with them, ostensibly to help with harvest preparations but actually to provide additional protection when Wade needed to be away. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color in the aspens on the mountainsides. There had been no further sign of Wilson, and Virginia began to hope that perhaps he had abandoned whatever plans for revenge he might have harbored. It was during this period of cautious optimism that Virginia made a discovery that changed everything. The symptoms had been subtle at first: a persistent tiredness, certain foods suddenly turning her stomach, a tenderness in her breasts that hadn't been there before. When her monthly cycle failed to appear for the second time, she could no longer deny the likely cause. She was carrying Wade's child. Virginia waited until evening to share her suspicion. After they had finished dinner and were sitting together before the fire, Wade reading aloud from a book of poetry they had purchased on their last trip to town. "Wade," she interrupted gently during a pause between verses, "I have something to tell you." He looked up, marking his place with a finger. "What is it?" Virginia took a deep breath, suddenly nervous despite the joy bubbling within her. "I believe I'm going to have a baby. Our baby." Wade went utterly still, the book slipping forgotten from his fingers to the floor. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the sound of the word. "Yes," Virginia confirmed, watching his face anxiously. "I'm not absolutely certain yet, but all the signs are there." For a heartbeat, Wade remained frozen, and Virginia felt a flicker of uncertainty. Then his face transformed with a smile of such radiant happiness that it took her breath away. "A baby," he said again, this time with wonder infusing the word. He moved from his chair to kneel before her, his hands reaching for hers. "Our child." Virginia nodded, tears of relief and joy springing to her eyes. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased?" Wade shook his head in disbelief at the inadequacy of the word. "Virginia, I never thought," he broke off, seeming to struggle for words. "A family of my own. It's more than I ever dared hope for." He leaned forward to kiss her, a kiss filled with tenderness and reverence that spoke more eloquently than words of his feelings. When they parted, Wade rested his forehead against hers, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Thank you?" "For what?" Virginia asked, smiling through her tears. "For saving me," Wade answered simply. "I was half alive before you came. Just existing. Now." He placed a gentle hand over her still flat stomach. "Now I have everything." The weeks that followed were filled with plans and preparations. Wade became even more protective, insisting on taking over the more strenuous household tasks and fretting whenever Virginia showed signs of fatigue. His concern was touching, if occasionally smothering, and Virginia alternated between gratitude for his attentiveness and gentle insistence that pregnancy wasn't an illness. Word of their expected child spread quickly through the small community, bringing visits from neighboring women bearing gifts and advice. Mrs. Palmer became a regular visitor, bringing books on childrearing and regaling Virginia with stories of her own 5 children. With the approach of winter, the threat of Wilson seemed to recede further into the background of their lives. There had been no sightings of him in any of the nearby settlements since August, and Sheriff Palmer reported that the mining negotiations in Helena had concluded, with Wilson presumably returning east with his investors. Still, keep your eyes open, the sheriff advised during a visit in early October. Men like that have long memories. Wade nodded grimly. Always do. The first snow fell in late October, earlier than usual, dusting the mountains and bringing a hush to the land. Virginia, now showing the first gentle swell of her pregnancy, found herself nesting with increased urgency, organizing and reorganizing the small bedroom to accommodate a cradle that Wade was crafting in the barn during the evenings. It was during this peaceful interlude, with winter settling around them like a protective blanket, that disaster struck from an unexpected quarter. Wade had ridden to town for supplies, taking advantage of what might be the last clear day before heavier snow made travel difficult. Virginia was alone at the ranch, Daisy her only companion as she worked on knitting a tiny blanket for the baby. The first indication of trouble was Daisy's sudden alert posture, ears pricked toward the window, a low growl building in her throat. Virginia set aside her knitting, moving cautiously to peer outside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Smoke. Thick, black smoke rising from the direction of the barn. Without stopping to grab a coat, Virginia rushed outside, Daisy at her heels. The barn was indeed on fire, flames already licking at the wooden walls and roof. The horses inside were screaming in terror, their panicked whinnies cutting through the crackle of the blaze. Virginia ran to the water pump, frantically working the handle to fill a nearby bucket. But it was immediately obvious that her efforts would be futile. The fire was spreading too quickly, fed by the dry hay stored in the loft. The animals were her priority now. Virginia ran to the barn door, pulling it open despite the wave of heat that blasted her face. Smoke billowed out, making her cough and her eyes water, but she could see the terrified horses straining at their stalls. "Easy, easy," she called, fighting her own fear as she moved inside, keeping low where the air was marginally clearer. She reached the first stall, fingers fumbling with the latch before finally freeing the panicked bay gelding, who bolted past her into the open air. 2 more horses and the milk cow remained. Virginia pushed deeper into the barn, the heat becoming nearly unbearable as burning debris began to fall from the loft above. She freed the cow next, then moved to the third stall, where Wade's favorite buckskin was rearing in terror. As she struggled with this latch, a burning beam crashed down just feet away, sending up a shower of sparks and blocking her path to the final horse. The buckskin burst free, nearly knocking Virginia down in its desperate flight to safety. The smoke was choking her now, making it impossible to see or breathe. Virginia knew she had to retreat. The final horse was unreachable, and she was risking her own life and her unborn child's with every second she remained. With a sob of regret, she turned toward the door, now barely visible through the thickening smoke. She had taken only a few steps when she heard a sound that didn't belong among the roar of flames and crack of burning timber. Footsteps. And then a voice, terribly familiar. "Did you really think I'd forgotten about you, Virginia?" James Wilson emerged from the smoke like a demon from the pit, his face twisted in a malevolent smile. In his hand was a kerosene lamp, confirming what Virginia had already suspected: the fire was no accident. "You!" she gasped, backing away, her hand instinctively going to her stomach in a protective gesture. Wilson's eyes followed the movement, his smile widening. "Expecting a happy event, are we? How touching!" "Why?" Virginia demanded, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. "Why would you do this? Your husband cost me more than you know." Wilson snarled, all pretense of civility gone. "That day in Philadelphia, the injuries I sustained in our altercation prevented me from meeting with a crucial investor. I lost everything because of him. Because of you." A loud crack from above warned of more falling debris. Wilson glanced up nervously but seemed determined to finish what he'd started. "I tracked him for years. Imagine my surprise when I discovered he'd married the very woman he rescued from me. It seemed like fate. Virginia's mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. The barn was becoming an inferno, and Wilson was between her and the door. Behind her was only the burning stall where the last horse was trapped. "You'll die too if we stay here," she pointed out, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The whole barn is going to collapse." "Perhaps," Wilson acknowledged with chilling indifference. "But I'll have my revenge. And your husband will live with the knowledge that he failed to protect you when it mattered most." He took a step toward her, and Virginia retreated, feeling the heat of the burning stall at her back. There was nowhere left to go. "Please," she said, abandoning pride in the face of desperation. "My baby should never have been conceived," Wilson finished coldly. A thunderous crash from above sent Virginia diving to the side as a section of the loft gave way, crashing down between her and Wilson. For a moment she lost sight of him in the resulting cloud of smoke and debris. Virginia seized the opportunity, scrambling toward where she thought the door might be, keeping low to find clearer air. Her lungs burned, her eyes streamed with tears, and the heat was blistering against her skin. Suddenly, hands grabbed her from behind, fingers digging cruelly into her arms. "Not so fast," Wilson hissed in her ear. Virginia fought with the strength of desperation, twisting in his grip, kicking backward at his legs. She connected solidly with his knee, earning a howl of pain as his grip loosened momentarily. It was enough. Virginia tore free, lunging forward blindly through the smoke. The sound of a gunshot froze her in place. For a surreal moment, Virginia thought she'd been hit, her hands automatically checking for wounds. But the pain didn't come. Instead, there was a choke sound behind her, and when she turned, Wilson was staggering backward, a crimson stain spreading across his chest. Beyond him, barely visible through the smoke, stood Wade, his revolver still raised, his face a mask of cold fury. "Virginia!" he shouted, holstering his weapon and rushing toward her. "My God, are you hurt?" She couldn't answer, coughing violently as Wade swept her into his arms and carried her out of the burning barn into the blessed, clear air outside. He set her down at a safe distance, his hands frantically checking her for injuries. "The baby?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. "Safe," Virginia managed between coughs. "I think we're both all right." Relief washed over Wade's features before hardening again into grim determination. "Stay here," he ordered, turning back toward the inferno that had been their barn. "Wade, no!" Virginia grabbed his arm. "Wilson is dead or dying," Wade finished flatly. "But there's still a horse in there." Before Virginia could protest further, he had pulled free of her grasp and was running back toward the barn, pulling his bandana up over his nose and mouth as he went. The next few minutes were the longest of Virginia's life as she watched the barn burning, straining to catch any glimpse of her husband through the flames and smoke. The structure was groaning ominously, the roof beginning to sag as support beams weakened. Just when Virginia was certain Wade had been lost, two figures burst from the barn entrance Wade, leading the terrified paint horse that had been trapped inside. They had barely cleared the doorway when, with a deafening roar, the entire roof collapsed inward, sending a geyser of sparks and flame into the sky. Wade guided the horse to where the other animals had gathered at the edge of the corral, then staggered back to Virginia, his face blackened with soot, his clothes singed in multiple places. Virginia threw herself into his arms, sobbing with relief. "I thought I'd lost you," she cried against his chest. Wade's arms tightened around her. "Never," he promised hoarsely. "Are you sure you're all right? The baby?" Virginia nodded, pulling back to examine him with anxious eyes. "And you? Are you burned?" "Nothing serious," Wade assured her, though he winced as he moved his left arm. "Wilson? Still inside when the roof collapsed?" Virginia said, shuddering at the memory of the man's hatred. Wade's expression was grim but satisfied. "Good riddance." Later, after Wade had tended to the frightened animals and made sure the fire wouldn't spread to the cabin, they sat together on their bed, Virginia wrapped in a blanket, while Wade gently cleaned the minor burns and scratches she'd sustained. "How did you know to come back?" Virginia asked, watching his face in the lamplight. "You weren't due home for hours yet." Wade's hands paused in their ministrations. "Same as before. Bad feeling." He shook his head, a muscle working in his jaw. "Should never have left you alone, not with Wilson still out there somewhere." "You couldn't have known he'd come back," Virginia said softly, placing her hand over his. "Or that he'd go to such extremes. I underestimated his hatred," Wade admitted. "Nearly cost me everything." Virginia leaned forward to press her forehead against his. "But it didn't. We're safe. All three of us." Wade's hand moved to rest gently on her stomach, where their child grew protected beneath her heart. "I saw the smoke from miles away," he said, his voice low and rough with remembered fear. "Rode so hard I nearly killed my horse. And then when I got here and saw you inside that burning barn, with Wilson." He closed his eyes, pain etching deep lines around his mouth. "I've never been so afraid." Virginia covered his hand with her own. "But you found the courage to act anyway," she reminded him. "Just like always." Wade opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It's not courage when it's about protecting what you love," he said simply. "It's necessity." The words hung between them, profound in their straightforward honesty. Wade had never directly spoken of love before, though his actions had demonstrated it 100 times over. "I love you too," Virginia whispered, the declaration feeling both momentous and utterly natural. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night in the cabin, when you gave me the bedroom and slept in the barn." A smile softened Wade's features, erasing years from his face. "Took us long enough to say it. Some things don't need saying," Virginia pointed out. "But it's nice to hear all the same." They held each other through the night, the loss of the barn and its contents seeming insignificant compared to what might have been lost. In the morning, they would face the task of rebuilding, but for now, they took comfort in each other's presence and the knowledge that their small family had survived intact. Word of the fire and Wilson's death spread quickly through the surrounding community. Within days, neighbors began arriving at the Calloway ranch, men with tools and lumber, women with food and supplies. What might have taken Wade months to rebuild alone was accomplished in weeks through the collective effort of a community that had come to respect the quiet cowboy and his courageous wife. By the time the first heavy snow of winter blanketed the land, a new barn stood in place of the old, the animals safely sheltered inside. The lost hay had been replaced by donations from neighboring ranchers, ensuring the livestock would survive until spring grazing. Virginia, her pregnancy now prominently visible, found herself embraced by the women of Lowell's Creek in a way she had never expected. The mail-order bride who had once been whispered about and rejected was now welcomed into their circle, her forthcoming child a cause for communal celebration. "Never seen anything like it," Sheriff Palmer remarked to Wade as they stood watching a group of men raise the last roof beam of the new barn. "Folks around here usually mind their own business. But you and Virginia," he shook his head in wonder. "You've become part of the heart of this community." Wade, still unused to such sentiments, merely nodded. But later, as he and Virginia lay together in their bed, the winter wind howling outside their snug cabin, he repeated the sheriff's words. "Never thought I'd belong anywhere," he admitted, his hand resting protectively over the swell of her belly where their child occasionally kicked. "Was just drifting before you." Virginia smiled in the darkness, finding his face with her fingertips. "We saved each other, I think. More than once. And we'll keep doing it," Wade promised, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Every day for the rest of our lives." The winter passed in peaceful seclusion, the couple drawing closer as they prepared for the arrival of their child. Wade crafted furniture for the nursery corner of their bedroom, a cradle, a small chest, a rocking chair for Virginia. She, in turn, sewed tiny garments and quilts, transforming scraps of fabric into treasures for their baby. Spring came early that year, the snow melting from the valleys by mid-March, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Virginia, now in her final month of pregnancy, moved more slowly but with a serene contentment that made her more beautiful than ever in Wade's eyes. Their daughter arrived on the first truly warm day of April, with Mrs. Palmer serving as midwife and Wade pacing anxiously outside until the infant's lusty cries announced her safe arrival. When finally allowed inside, he approached the bed with reverent wonder, gazing down at the tiny bundle cradled in Virginia's arms. "She's perfect," he whispered, tentatively touching a finger to his daughter's petal-soft cheek. "Would you like to hold her?" Virginia asked, smiling despite her exhaustion. Wade looked momentarily terrified. "I don't know how." "Like this," Virginia demonstrated, transferring the swaddled infant to her father's arms. "Support her head." Wade cradled his daughter with infinite care, his expression transforming with awe as tiny fingers wrapped around his calloused thumb. "She's so small," he marveled. "But strong. Like her father," Virginia observed softly. They named her Hope, a simple word that encompassed all she represented to them: the future, renewal, and the unexpected joy they had found in each other against all odds. As spring bloomed into summer, the Calloway family settled into their new rhythm of life. Wade built an addition to the cabin to serve as a proper nursery, and Virginia planted flowers alongside her vegetable garden, adding splashes of color to their homestead. Hope thrived, growing rapidly into a cheerful baby with her father's blue eyes and her mother's honey-brown hair. Wade, initially awkward with the tiny infant, became an adoring father who thought nothing of interrupting ranch work to respond to his daughter's coos and gurgles. On the anniversary of their wedding, Wade surprised Virginia with a gift: a locket containing a tiny portrait of Hope on one side and a lock of Wade's hair on the other. "To replace the one you lost in the fire," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. Virginia touched it reverently. "It's beautiful. But I didn't get you anything." Wade smiled, drawing her into his arms. "You've given me everything already," he said simply. "A home. A family. A life worth living." Standing on the porch of their cabin, with their daughter sleeping peacefully inside and the Montana landscape stretching before them, Virginia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a terrified young woman fleeing an unwanted suitor to a mail-order bride rejected by 3 men, to finding unexpected salvation in the quiet cowboy who had crossed her path not once but 3 times. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked, his arm warm around her waist. Virginia leaned into his strength, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "I was thinking that some matches truly are made in heaven," she replied. "Even when they take the most unlikely paths to find each other." Wade's answering smile held all the love and promise of their shared future. "I don't know about heaven," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I do know this: finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me, Virginia Calloway. And I plan to spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret choosing to stay." "I never could," Virginia assured him, turning in his arms to face him fully. "Not when staying means I found everything I never knew I was looking for." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, they sealed their promise with a kiss, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together: the mail-order bride no one wanted and the lone cowboy who had saved her life, bound now by a love stronger than any trial or tribulation the world could devise. And in years to come, when their homestead had grown into a prosperous ranch, when Hope had been joined by 2 brothers and a sister, when their hair had begun to silver and lines of laughter marked their faces, Wade and Virginia would still sometimes sit on their porch in the evening, hands clasped together, marveling at how 3 chance encounters had led to a lifetime of happiness either had dared to imagine possible. For in the vast wilderness of the Montana Territory, amid the harsh realities of frontier life, they had found not just survival, but true belonging in their community, in their home, and most importantly, in each other's hearts.